Your friends and behind the Teals with Sky News contributor Rocco Loiacono. Rocco, you had a great column this weekend where you described the Teals as greens in designer-labeled clothes. What have you uncovered? Because I know that you've been looking a lot at the Teals over the course of this election. Tell us more about what you have uncovered about the Teals' voting record and what message that ought to send to people who are living in those seats and those electorates who think that they're just sort of a liberal light.
Jeff, the Teals like to brand themselves as community independents, but when you look at their voting record, they're anything but, in the sense that if you take Kate Chaney, for example, in Curtin, on her own admission, she votes with the Greens. She voted with the Greens in the last Parliament 56% of the time. But if you look at the first preference votes the Greens got at the 22 election in the seat of Curtin, they got barely 10% of the first preference votes. So she's voting with the Greens 5.5 times more than the Greens' actual vote in Curtin. And for the other Teals, it ranges anywhere from 75% of the time they voted in the last Parliament to 81% with someone like Zali Steggall and Zoe Daniel. They voted with the Greens, say, nearly 80% of the time. But the first preference votes across the other seats in Melbourne and the North Shore of Sydney that the Teals hold, the Greens, on the first preference count at the last election, got anywhere between 6% and 9% of the first preference vote. So, so much for being community independent and reflecting the wishes of the community. If at the end of the day, if it looks like a Green, talks like a Green and votes with the Greens, it probably is a Green rather than a community independent.
Well, Rocco, I'm so glad you talked about voting with the Greens, because this week Anthony Albanese refused to apologize over a decision to put a Greens candidate number 2 on his how to vote card in Graidler, despite that person having some fairly, shall we say, spicy opinions about Israel, saying that preferences don't count. Have a look at this.
People should vote number 1 for the Australian Labor Party. And I know what the name of the Labor candidate is in Graidler. And he's run a number of times, and last time round I won on primary votes. My preferences don't get counted.
What did you make of this beyond the usual sort of Anthony Albanese routine of simply saying, I wash my hands of, whatever disaster or problem has come down the pike for my campaign?
Well, he's just denying the history of elections in this country since about 1990, when the Labor Party, thanks to Graham Richardson, has actively courted the Green vote. Anthony Albanese is one of probably around 8 or 9 seats at Graidler, which will probably just be counted on first preference votes. All the other House of Rep seats, 140 or so, will have to go to preferences. And why do you think that the ALP has preferenced the Greens second? They will probably get around 30-odd%, the ALP, of first preference votes, and the Greens will poll around 12% of first preference votes. Without the Greens, the ALP cannot get into office. Without the Greens, the ALP cannot get anything through the Senate, as your last guest was pointing out. And it just goes to show how much the ALP is courting the Greens, because they're adopting some of their policies. The ALP has on its platform this time around to reintroduce nature positive, to beef up the Environmental Protection Agency, and taking on board the Greens policy of funding, subsidising home batteries to the tune of $4,000. It's actually a Greens policy. When Anthony Albanese says, preferences don't count, well, yeah, you just don't. It's just not believable based on history and the Labor platform.
So, Rocco, you've analysed these platforms very carefully. You've studied them. You've written about them extensively. If it comes down to this Labor minority government, if they need Greens to get through in some sort of alliance, what would be some of the things that voters should keep in mind if they're thinking about going Greens or pitching Labor into minority that could be on the table that they might not be accounting for? Whether it's foreign policy, domestic environment.
Said the quiet part out loud at the National Press Club, and in other instances when he wants to severely reduce, if not abolish, negative gearing, reduce the capital gains tax concession when people sell their assets. At the moment, if you sell an asset, you get a 50% capital gains tax discount. That'll be gone. You can kiss any further tax cuts goodbye, because particularly corporate tax cuts. In fact, they want corporations to pay more because the Greens want to fund free childcare and free university and climate reparations to Pacific nations. The Greens also want to force landlords to put solar panels on their roof if the tenant requests it. And of course, that's going to be paid for by you and me through higher taxes. Look, in 2010, Julia Gillard said there will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. Lo and behold, she made an alliance with the Greens and introduced a carbon tax. Anthony Albanese and Labor Party can say they're not going to do a deal with Greens, and they can deny that as much as they like. But at the end of the day, they're in hock to the Greens through their preferences, and the Greens are going to call in some favours when the ALP will rely on them to get either through the Senate or to get supply through the House.
And you mentioned Richard before, and we know his motto, whatever it takes, and, whatever it takes to get power. Rocco Loiacono, thank you so much for your time.